The night shift clock blinked 3:07 a.m., and the hospital hummed like a tired machine. Narrator said in 20 minutes someone will dial 911 and a life will fall off the map. Emily Carter said, "Last charts, then I'm out," as she pressed her badge to the exit and glanced at the rain. Jenna Brooks said, "Text me when you get home," trying to sound casual, failing a little. The cameras saw nothing unusual, just a nurse, a bag, and a weary stride into the lot. Detective Mark Hale said, "If a ghost walked her to the car, it left no footprint." The wind grabbed loose flyers and slapped them against the security booth window. Owen Lee said, "You heading out already?" But the words were swallowed by thunder. The street light above space 27 pulsed like a heartbeat, then steadied. Carla Ruiz said 911, "What is your emergency?" as a voice rattled through static and fear. Narrator said by sunrise, "The questions will outnumber the answers." Someone screamed, and the scream cut off like a wire. The call came in jagged and breathless, and the operator leaned into calm like a practiced prayer. Carla Ruiz said, "Tell me exactly what you see," as thunder stitched the distance. A voice gasped about a car, a door, a bag on the passenger seat, and nobody inside. Narrator said, "Silence lives in the spaces between words, and tonight it grows bold." A patrol car drifted into the lot with lights low, like it feared waking something sleeping in the concrete. Detective Mark Hale said, "Secure the perimeter," while his mind cataloged failures from cases that still visited at 3 a.m. Jenna Brooks said she would not ghost us, gripping her phone so tight the case clicked. Owen Lee said, "I saw her pass. That's all." Then the rain swallowed her. The camera on the pole turned in a lazy arc and missed whatever mattered. Narrator said, "The first minutes decide everything." The minutes slipped by with damp, clinical indifference. The trunk was clean, too clean, like a staged silence waiting to be believed. Hale said no mud, no fibers, no struggle marks, and his breath fogged the beam of his flashlight. Jenna Brooks said, "She keeps spare sneakers in there," pointing at the emptiness like it might confess. Narrator said, "Absence can be louder than blood." Owen Lee said, "The camera by the dock jams when it storms," and the tech groaned because he already knew. A drip from the open door kept time on the floor mat, patient and cruel. Carla Ruiz said, "Caller disconnected," and the room of monitors swallowed the last trace of a voice. Hale said, "Bag, keys, phone?" And officers shook their heads in a slow chorus. Narrator said, "The night offers no bargain, only a bill." Somewhere, a freight train moaned, and the lot answered with hollow echo. The staff rooms smelled of reheated coffee and rain trapped in coats. Narrator said, "Lives are mosaics of small rituals, and tonight the tiles are missing." Jenna Brooks said, "Her locker is still locked," then hesitated because the word still felt like a promise. Hale said, "Photograph everything," while a tech mapped the room with a patient lens. A mug with lipstick sat beside a folded cardigan, and the lipstick matched the smile on the bulletin board. Owen Lee said, "She waved goodnight, and the memory quivered like a thread about to snap." The vending machine hummed, throwing a green cast over the floor. Narrator said, "We search for fingerprints on the air." Hale said, "Who walks her to the car?" And no one wanted to admit the answer was no one. The rain softened, but the dread did not. The rumor arrived before sunrise, riding group chats and weary hearts. Narrator said, "A city wakes, and fear drafts an outline where facts should be." Hale said, "No leaks," but the words felt ceremonial. Jenna Brooks said, "Emily Carter is not a rumor," and her voice cracked on the name. Owen Lee said, "I checked the booth logs," holding up a clipboard like a shield. Carla Ruiz said, "If they call back, I will keep them talking," and she meant it like a vow. The lot steamed under a shy dawn, and seagulls screamed over the dumpster like impatient jurors. Hale said, "We reconstruct the last 60 minutes, step by step, and traced an invisible path from exit to car." Narrator said, "This is the part where hope fakes a smile." The smile looked brave, then trembled, then broke. The photos on the mantel spoke louder than any case file. Narrator said to understand the loss, we step into the rooms she left behind. Emily Carter's mother, Margaret Carter, said she laughed at the smallest things, even when life pressed heavy. Her father, Thomas Carter, said she wanted to be a nurse since she was 12, his voice breaking like old wood. Narrator said, dreams are seeds, watered with hope, and hers grew into service. Friends remembered her singing in the break room, always off-key, always joyful. Jenna Brooks said she believed kindness mattered even when nobody watched. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls she baked on Sundays. A cat wandered in, pausing at the empty chair, as if waiting. Narrator said, we know her not by how she died, but by how she lived. Her absence pressed against the air, shaping silence into grief. The knock on the door felt like thunder wrapped in uniform. Narrator said, every family remembers the moment the world split open. Officer James Porter said, we're sorry to inform you your daughter has been reported missing. Margaret Carter said, no, you must be mistaken, clutching at the doorknob as if it could anchor her. Thomas Carter said, where is she? What happened? Tell me now, anger masking terror. Narrator said, grief wears many faces, denial, rage, disbelief, each arriving uninvited. The hallway clock ticked louder than the officer's words. Margaret whispered, she was supposed to call me after her shift. Silence sat heavy, filling the gaps between questions. Narrator said, that night, hope began its cruel dance with fear. Emily's partner, Daniel Reed, sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. Narrator said, love stories do not end when one voice goes silent. Daniel Reed said, she texted me at midnight, said she was tired but fine. His hand hovered over his phone, scrolling the last message again and again. Narrator said, screens hold the final echoes of the living. He whispered, she promised we'd plan our trip next month, the words trembling. Friends gathered, offering fragments of memory, as if piecing together a broken vase. Jenna Brooks said she wanted to dance at your wedding, and Daniel closed his eyes. Narrator said, when the future collapses, memory becomes both comfort and blade. The house filled with murmurs of neighbors and casseroles left at the door. Narrator said, grief multiplies in the company of silence. Margaret Carter said, every knock makes me hope it's her, voice trembling. Thomas Carter said, people stare, whisper, and wait for answers we don't have. Jenna Brooks said, she was more than a case file. She was family to us too. Narrator said, loved ones carry the cruel weight of questions too heavy for strangers. Margaret pressed Emily's cardigan to her chest, inhaling the scent that lingered. Thomas slammed his fist on the table, frustration breaking through his composure. Narrator said, the hardest part is the not knowing, the empty chair at every table. The town square filled with candles and folded hands. Narrator said, communities grieve as one, even when justice is absent. A banner with Emily's photo fluttered in the cold night air. Margaret Carter said, please, if anyone knows anything, come forward, her voice carrying across the crowd. Thomas Carter said, she deserves to come home, holding back tears. Jenna Brooks said, we won't stop searching, and the crowd answered with murmurs of agreement. Narrator said, vigils are both prayer and protest, demanding answers from the dark. The candle flames quivered in the wind, each one a heartbeat refusing to fade. Daniel Reed whispered, she should be here, not a photograph. Narrator said, grief lit the night brighter than any streetlight. The investigation began with questions stacked higher than answers. Narrator said, detectives search for patterns, but some nights give only static. Detective Mark Hale said, we start with the basics: her locker, her phone, her route. Officers combed through logs, staring at gaps that screamed louder than the entries. Hale said, every detail matters, even the ones that look small. Jenna Brooks said, she never left without texting me, not once. Narrator said, when patterns break, suspicion creeps in like fog. Owen Lee said, I saw her walk, but I didn't see her leave, his eyes heavy with doubt. The white sedan gleamed under rain, mocking with its quiet. Narrator said, the first sweep offered fragments, not answers, and the silence grew. Witnesses lined up, each holding a version of the truth. Narrator said, memory is a fickle witness, reshaping itself with time. Mrs. Linda Keene said, I saw a man near the car, tall, hooded, eyes darting. Another witness, Derek Shaw, said, I only heard tires, nothing more. Hale muttered, accounts never match, under his breath. Narrator said, contradiction poisons certainty, turning clarity into smoke. Jenna Brooks said, she always parked near the lights. Why that spot? Officers scribbled, erasing as quickly as they wrote. The crowd whispered, feeding the shadows. Narrator said, what is truth when fear edits the story? Days turned to weeks, and each lid bent into nothing. Narrator said, false hope wastes the most precious resource, time. Hale said, every path we chase dies in the dark. Officers shuffled files, each folder thinner than it should have been. Jenna Brooks said, it feels like she's vanishing twice, once from us, once from the case. Narrator said, cold cases freeze not in evidence, but in hearts. Hale stared at the evidence board, photos pinned, red string stretched like veins. Owen Lee said, if cameras don't lie, then someone erased the truth. The air smelled of stale coffee and wet paper. Narrator said, the silence hardened into walls. A suspect finally emerged, pulling the investigation in sharp focus. Narrator said, shadows became faces, faces became names. Hale said, check the records of Michael Grant. He was seen near the hospital. Officers shifted, energy sparking with renewed purpose. Witness Derek Shaw said, yes, that was the man I thought I saw, maybe. Narrator said, doubt always hides in the word, maybe. Jenna Brooks said, he always creeped her out. She said so once. Hale said, patterns forming, even if thin. The silence cracked, replaced by cautious urgency. Narrator said, every suspect is a door. Some lead to answers, others to more walls. Nights dragged on, cases piled, and Emily's photo watched from the wall. Narrator said, time is the cruelest accomplice of the guilty. Hale said, we're chasing shadows while the trail goes colder by the hour. Officers sighed, packing up, exhaustion written across their faces. Jenna Brooks whispered, she deserves more than silence, holding back tears. Owen Lee said, the longer this waits, the less chance we'll know the truth. Narrator said, years pass in the blink of a case unsolved. Hale stared at the unsolved board, shadows lengthening, resolve thinning. Narrator said, the story does not stop. It only stalls, waiting for a break. Years later, the dusted boxes of forgotten evidence returned to the table. Narrator said, technology breathes life into silence when time alone cannot. Detective Mark Hale said, reopen the Carter file, run every scrap again. A lab technician pulled a sealed envelope, gloves squeaking on plastic. Jenna Brooks said, after all these years, could something still speak? Hale muttered, DNA doesn't age like memory does. Narrator said, the hum of machines can expose secrets that storms once buried. The whir of the sequencer filled the sterile lab, more haunting than quiet. Hale stared, unblinking, as the monitor sparked with results. Narrator said, a new path cracked open in the wall of cold silence. The phone rang with the urgency of unfinished business. Narrator said, voices long silent, sometimes return with the weight of guilt. Carla Ruiz said, I can't shake it anymore. I heard something that night, her tone jagged with fear. Hale said, tell me now, every detail, no matter how small. Carla whispered, I heard her scream, then a man's voice, low, angry. Narrator said, truth waits, but fear often delays its delivery. Jenna Brooks said, why didn't you come forward sooner? Carla said, I was scared. He knows where I live. Hale said, Fear has already stolen years from her family. Narrator said, the voice on the line was both confession and curse. The lab results landed like a stone breaking still water. Narrator said, science wrote a name where silence had ruled. Hale said, the DNA matches Michael Grant. Finally, a lead with teeth. Officers exchanged glances, the air thick with vindication. Jenna Brooks whispered, she told me she didn't trust him, her voice trembling. Narrator said, injustice cracks when truth sharpens its blade. A photo of Michael Grant was pinned to the board, his smile unsettling. Hale said, this changes everything, we go back to the start. Narrator said, sometimes, it takes decades for shadows to confess. Old files were unsealed, and forgotten connections began to scream. Narrator said, history hid links, but persistence unknots them. Hale said, Grant worked security shifts near the hospital during that year. Records spread across the desk like spilled secrets. Jenna Brooks said, he stalked her once after a late shift, she told me. Narrator said, the past does not erase itself. It waits for the right eyes. Hale muttered, witnesses, co-workers, friends, they all circle back to him. Threads of paper and memory twisted into a net. Narrator said, the hidden web began to glow under scrutiny. The weight of evidence pressed like a tide rising fast. Narrator said, the story began to align, and the shadows shrank. Hale said, we're close, every trail leads back to him now. Jenna Brooks said, so many years stolen, and now finally, a chance for answers. Narrator said, clarity, after chaos burns brighter than hope. Officers prepared warrants, footsteps echoing down the precinct halls. Hale said, this is the break we've been waiting for. Narrator said, the long night of confusion bent under the light of truth. The case, once ice, now cracked wide open. The air was thick with tension as the arrest was made. Narrator said, a suspect no longer had the luxury of the shadows. Detective Mark Hale said, you're under arrest for the murder of Emily Carter. Michael Grant, his face pale, said, I didn't do it. I don't even know what you're talking about. His voice cracked with panic. Narrator said, fear strips away composure, revealing the truth beneath. Hale said, it's over, Grant. The evidence speaks for itself. The officers surrounding Grant were ready, every movement sharp and calculated. Narrator said, the investigation had come to its brutal climax, but the truth was far from simple. The cold steel of handcuffs echoed like finality. As Michael Grant was booked, whispers of disbelief spread like wildfire. Narrator said, even when evidence confirms guilt, doubt lingers. Jenna Brooks said, he never looked like a killer, but the truth doesn't care about appearances. Officer Carla Ruiz said, the case is closed, but something feels off. Narrator said, sometimes, even justice leaves a bitter taste in the mouth. The paperwork moved through the system, each page another piece of finality. Hale said, we're done, but it doesn't feel like closure. The clock ticked away the moments, indifferent to the gravity of the room. The courtroom was a theater of emotions as the trial unfolded. Narrator said, the truth may be served, but the pain of its revelation lingers. The prosecutor spoke, we have all the evidence we need to convict Michael Grant. Michael Grant's defense attorney stood, eyes narrowed, none of this proves anything beyond reasonable doubt. Hale's hand tightened around his cup of coffee, the familiar burn of frustration rising. Narrator said, in the game of justice, the stakes are always high. Jenna Brooks whispered, he was so sure of himself before. Now, he looks like he's losing everything. The jury listened, faces unreadable, as the defense and prosecution clashed. The verdict was read with chilling clarity. Narrator said, guilt was no longer in question. Now it was only a matter of the sentence. The judge's voice was firm, we the jury find the defendant guilty of murder. Michael Grant's face collapsed in defeat, eyes wide as if struck by a thunderclap. Hale exhaled sharply, his hands still trembling. Narrator said, justice had been served, but the cost was clear, lives left scarred in its wake. Jenna Brooks turned away, tears welling up as she looked at the family's empty chair. Grant's family sat motionless, a silent reflection of their son's guilt. The aftermath was a quiet echo of the chaos before it. Narrator said for the victim's family, closure felt like a hollow word. Margaret Carter, Emily's mother, said, I don't know if I can forgive him, but at least she's not forgotten. Thomas Carter said, I just wish she could have walked out of that hospital just one more time. Narrator said, even when justice is won, the wounds remain. Hale, Jenna, and the team gathered in the break room, the weight of their success no comfort. Hale said, it never feels like enough. The team sat in silence, the cost of their work settling over them. The courtroom sat in heavy silence after the verdict. Narrator said, for the Carter family, closure was now a bitter pill, swallowed but not digested. Margaret Carter, Emily's mother, stood motionless, staring at the gavel as it fell. Thomas Carter, with a solemn face, said, I never imagined it would end like this, with us left here to pick up the pieces. Jenna Brooks stood in the back, her eyes scanning the room, trying to measure the weight of justice against the emptiness of their grief. Hale walked over, his footsteps loud in the stillness, his voice steady but worn. It's over. He's behind bars. But the family's pain lingered in the room like smoke, thick and suffocating. Narrator said, in the pursuit of justice, there's never truly a winner, only the remnants of a broken battle. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with reporters, flashing cameras, and the weight of unanswered questions. Narrator said, the case may have been closed, but the questions never left. Jenna Brooks said, I still don't know if it's enough. The press conference was a blur of flashing lights and frantic questions, but it was the faces of the family that haunted the scene. Margaret Carter, her voice steady, said, justice doesn't bring her back. We will carry this grief for the rest of our lives. Thomas Carter added, it's over for them, but not for us. Hale stood in the background, his face unreadable, eyes still haunted by the case that had consumed him. Narrator said, even when the law is satisfied, the heart is rarely at peace. The house felt too quiet, too empty without Emily. Narrator said, the world continues, but in the corners of a home, the loss is felt forever. Margaret Carter sat on the couch, holding a photo of Emily as a child, her fingers trembling. Thomas Carter stood by the window, staring out at nothing, lost in thought. Jenna Brooks sat across from them, her presence heavy with the unspoken. She said she would have hated to see you like this. Margaret Carter, voice breaking, said, I never thought I'd have to bury my own child. Narrator said, grief is not something you carry, it carries you, folding you into its sorrow. The months that followed felt like an unbroken march toward a future that seemed too empty to face. Narrator said, the shadow of a crime never truly fades, it lingers in the corners of every room. Hale sat in his office, staring at the wall of case files, now closed. Jenna Brooks said, we did everything we could, but why does it still feel like we failed? Hale rubbed his face, the weight of unsolved moments pressing him down. Because we didn't get to say goodbye. She deserved that. Narrator said, in the end, justice is only a reflection of what we cannot bring back. Time passed, but the grief never fully lifted. Narrator said, even when the case is solved, the victim is never truly gone, only redefined by the lives they left behind. Margaret Carter, on a visit to Emily's grave, said, this is all that's left now. Thomas Carter stood beside her, the weight of years of loss etched into his face. Jenna Brooks said, I won't forget her. I promise. Narrator said, the dead remain in the hearts of those who love them, a flickering flame in the shadows of the living. The wind carried the soft rustling of leaves, the only sound as they stood in the quiet cemetery. The silence in the room was broken only by the soft rustling of pages. Narrator said, in the world of cold cases, even the smallest detail can make the difference. Detective Mark Hale sat at his desk staring at the old evidence file. There's always something left behind, he muttered. Years had passed, but the mystery of Emily Carter's case was still vivid in his mind. He flicked through the file, pausing at a photograph of a man who had been previously overlooked. This doesn't feel right, Hale whispered, running his fingers over the image. He had seen this man before, at the courthouse, on the day of the trial. Was this the missing link? No one ever talked about him, Hale said to himself. The walls of the room seemed to close in, the air growing heavy with the weight of unsolved truth. Narrator said, sometimes the most unsettling truths hide in the shadows of forgotten faces. The investigation took a new direction, one that had been buried under years of oversight. Narrator said, the past never fully sleeps. Sometimes it stirs just when you think it's long gone. Hale rushed to the cold case unit, eyes narrowed with purpose. He said, I need to find this man. He's not just a witness. His colleagues, long accustomed to his meticulous ways, followed his lead. They ran through records, scanned old footage, pieced together long-forgotten interviews. There's something here, Hale said, staring at the screen. The man in the photograph had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. Narrator said, a clue so simple it was overlooked, yet so dangerous in its quiet revelation. The team scrambled, the rush of discovery palpable in the air. This is it, Hale said, his voice rising with conviction. We're going back to square one. The suspect was tracked to a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Narrator said the final pieces were falling into place, but the danger was palpable. Hale led his team down darkened streets, the weight of years pressing on them. This is where it ends, Hale said, voice low. He glanced at the team, feeling the intensity of the moment. They approached a dilapidated house, the air thick with tension. Jenna Brooks said, he's here, isn't he? Hale nodded, his grip on his gun tightening. Narrator said every step was a risk. Every second stretched into eternity. The truth had a cost. The door creaked open. The shadow of the man standing in the frame was unmistakable. Hale said, step back. The team was ready, but so was the man in the doorway, his face unreadable. The confrontation was swift, a blur of motion as the suspect was apprehended. Narrator said, in the final moments everything fell into place. The man stood frozen for a moment, then bolted. Hale shouted, stop, as he chased him through the narrow alley. The suspect turned, eyes wide with panic, but the officers closed in. We got him, Hale said, breathless, as the suspect was tackled to the ground. The weight of years of unanswered questions finally broke through. Hale stood over him, watching the man's face twist in shock. You're not getting away this time, Hale said, voice cold. The man's defiance crumbled, and for the first time in years, the truth was no longer a mystery. Narrator said in the end, the truth always finds a way, even if it takes a lifetime. The case was finally closed, but the weight of it never truly lifted. Narrator said, some cases end with closure, but others leave scars that fade only in time. Hale stood at the gravesite, the wind tugging at his jacket. It's over now, he said softly, his voice carrying more than just relief. Jenna Brooks stood beside him, her face somber, as they both gazed at the tombstone. We did it, Jenna whispered, but there was no joy in her voice, only quiet respect. Narrator said in the end, justice is not a victory, it's a reminder that some things are lost forever. Hale paused, looking at the gravestone one last time. Rest in peace, Emily, he said. The wind carried away the words, and for a moment, the world felt still.